Charleston County needed to expand the Palmetto Commerce Parkway to alleviate traffic problems and congestion. And in order to build the road, we had to conduct an archaeological and architectural survey. And when we conducted the survey, we walked through the swamps that are all around us here, and we quickly encountered several banks and canals and ditches that led us to believe right away that they were parts of inland rice fields. Carolina was one of the largest exporters of rice in the 19th century. But in order to understand how rice became such a viable crop for Carolina planters, we need to step back almost 100 years in order to learn how rice was developed first. And it was first developed in inland settings like these swamps that surround us today.
An inland rice field is primarily a field in a freshwater, naturally freshwater swamp that was fed by a natural spring, a creek, or a pond. That is, the water did not use tidal action. It used some form of naturally occurring water, either through rainfall or in what we often call reserves or reservoirs.
The first planters that came to Carolina came from Barbados, and they were already ingrained in a sugar system there, where they had Africans laboring in the sugar fields and in the sugar mills. So they came to Carolina, and they were looking for a cash crop that would almost equal sugar. They tried citrus, they tried wine, mulberry trees for silk, but the one crop that was best suited to this environment, being low, swampy areas with high ground right next to them, was rice.
Well, one of the reasons that the planters looked to African slaves was that they had experience growing rice in Africa. They brought in large numbers, particularly after the mid-century, from Senegambia regions that already produced rice. The early planters, really, their African slaves did the work of converting this field into a rice plantation. This is a swamp. To convert this into a land that could grow rice, one must first drain the land, so we have to dig ditches through it, just like we would today, and allow the water to run off. And then the land is embanked so the water doesn't come back in large volumes. And then the trees that you see around here have to be cut by hand. Of course, we did in the 18th century. This was all done by hand. The trees' roots had to be removed. The ground then has to be leveled. A method of bringing water from one field to the next has to be installed. Then the field has to be planted. It has to be turned over and the crop produced. And then water run off it, and on it and off it at the appropriate times to produce the grain. The grain will then grow up to be about waist high and forms a field of almost golden wheat-like appearance.
To work in these rice fields and the way it would have been, how it would have felt to a person in the mid-18th century, the first word that comes to mind is hot, humid, and sticky. Lots of bugs, no retreat from the sun at all. There were no trees at all in the fields. So it would have been very hard. Also, the labor involved with rice wasn't just the growth of the crop and the processing of the crop, it was the management of the rice fields. There was labor involved in the fields almost all year round, and there was no stage in the summer or even in the winter that was any easier than any other part.
I think when you look at these fields, in particular these right here, but in any of the rice field systems throughout the Low Country, you can't help but be impressed with what these people built. This is an awe-inspiring feat. One historian often has commented that in the 18th century in Carolina, more earth was moved to create the inland field systems in this part of the country than the Egyptians moved rocks to build the pyramids.
These rice fields are very important to us today because they're one of the largest monuments left from all of the enslaved Africans that labored in Carolina for the planters that owned them. There really isn't anything in South Carolina today that you can walk on, stand on, look at, and appreciate that is as large or as extensive as inland rice fields.